No, thank you, Mario, and thanks to the European House Ambrosetti, because it's maybe the first time that you put justice and the rule of law on the agenda after so many years and decades. So it's become to be maybe an important topic, and it was possible to listen about some comments on this already yesterday and today in other panels. And I want to say maybe first that in justice we try just to implement and apply a rule-based order decided by nations at international level, or in the EU decided by the member states. Also, when the member states decide to use the qualified majority, and maybe one day in taxation, we will see, but it's all the time just to apply rules decided by the member states or by nations at the international level, freely, and sometimes in member states by referendum. So with a vote in the population, just to mention one member state in such a situation, Poland. It was by a referendum, it was possible to approve the treaty. And so I just want to comment on three issues. The first one, at the international level. You start yesterday with Ukraine. We asked to Russia to apply international rules. Territorial integrity, sovereignty of Ukraine. If it's not, we are coming with sanctions. And in the sanctions, there are some sanctions that I need to apply as Commissioner for Justice. I mean, the way to freeze assets of oligarchs or entities. And I will say that we have a task force, freeze and seize at the European level. Until now, it was possible to freeze 14 billions of euro from oligarchs, 14. With 6 member states, we are reaching 90% of that. So with between 1 and 3 billions for the different member states. We urge the others to do more. There are, just to give an example, 4 member states with less than 1 million. It's quite not so much. In Italy, you are just with less than 300 millions for the moment. So we try to continue to work on it and to freeze more and more. With the G7, we are at 30 billions for the oligarchs and 300 billions for the Russian Central Bank. So it's a huge effect of the way to finance the war in Russia, because to freeze 300 billions of euros or dollars from the Central Bank of Russia has become to be efficient. The other way to work about Ukraine is about the war crimes. We have started investigations in Ukraine, 30,000 investigations about different kinds of incidents, but also in 14 member states, not yet in Italy, but there are 14 member states starting national investigations about war crimes, and you know that there are also investigations from the ICC, the International Criminal Court. And we are working with the Prosecutor General of Ukraine, with Karim Khan, the prosecutor of the ICC, together to try to prosecute war crimes. There are already some trials in Ukraine. There are also trials in Russia, to be very honest and frank. And we have given a better competence to Eurojust. It was possible, thanks to the different Ministers of Justice around the table, to change the regulation of Eurojust in 2 weeks or 3 weeks. It's a real record at the EU level. And we collect evidences in Eurojust, and we exchange evidence with all the prosecutors in relation with some prosecutions. That's for Ukraine. Yesterday, I've listened about some discussions concerning inequalities, climate change, environment, social issues like labor conditions. It's possible maybe to say something about child labor or forced labor. There are new discussions in the UN about that. And of course, we have international conventions dedicated to environment or dedicated to social issues. And I've proposed to the Commission in February this year, and we have adopted a new proposal for directive concerning a due diligence process. So to ask to one person of all the European companies, the large companies, to organize a due diligence process to try to avoid and mitigate the risk for the environment or for social and human rights, because it's very important to do that in the entire supply chain. So we'll see if there is a correlation between many declarations that I've listened also here and the reality around the table when it will be needed to impose some obligations for all the member states and not just with one legislation in France or one other in Germany. I don't want to elaborate more on this, but we are with a scope concerning 1% of the EU companies, but that means 50% of the total GDP in the EU. And then, of course, the third remark dedicated to the rule of law as such, if I may. We are working for the first time with this Commission with a new instrument, the Rule of Law Report. We are now with the third edition of the Rule of Law Report for the first time this year. For the 27 member states on an equal footing, we are coming with recommendations, and we try to explain what is needed to do, again, to fulfill all the rules that there are into place at the EU level or at the international level. And we try to do that with a dialogue with the member states. And with Italy, it's true, Mario, we have organized such a dialogue to try to implement some reform in the justice system, and I have in many contacts with Marta to try to follow the process in the Italian Parliament about the fight against backlogs in different procedures, to reform civil and criminal codes, but also to see if it's possible to have a new organization of the High Judiciary Council with an application of a principle that we have at the EU level, a majority of the members that must be judges elected by their peers, and we try to do that in other member states, like in Spain, in Luxembourg, and in other member states. And so it's very important to engage a dialogue. Of course, if it's not enough to have a dialogue, we have other instruments, and you know that we're also using infringement proceedings to ask a correct application of the law. To give an example, sometimes we are asking a fine against member states if it's needed. About the disciplinary regime of the judges in Poland, we have asked a fine and we have received a decision with a fine of 1 million per day. But now we have with more than 300 million requests from Poland just to apply the rules coming from a common approach at the European level about the disciplinary regime of the judge. We have also other tools, I don't want to elaborate of that, like the Article 7. We have since some years discussions about Poland and Hungary around the table of the Council, but now we have a new link between the budget and the rule of law, is the conditionality mechanism. If we have concerns about the way to apply the rule of law in one member state, it's possible to propose to the Council to stop or to suspend some funding. And we have started a procedure about Hungary. And the last possibility that we have, it's about the so-called European semester. It seems to be just dedicated to economics, but not. There are also in the European semester some remarks about the justice system, about the fight against corruption. And now, in the recovery and resilience plan, coming from the next generation EU that you have described, we ask to the member states to implement those reforms, also concerning justice and fight against corruption, to be concrete. And I must say, I was in my own country Minister of Finance for 12 years, and I know that a report about the rule of law is very efficient. But a budgetary pressure is maybe more efficient. And we have seen in the last months that it's very, very efficient to ask to the member states to implement some reforms to receive the money coming from the next generation EU. It's the reason why, till now, we didn't agree on the plan from Hungary, and we have agreed on the plan coming from Poland, but we didn't pay anything to Poland before the implementation of the reforms. And again, when I'm looking to the situation in Italy, it was possible with the government to implement, I have mentioned some reforms in the justice field. Of course, we are not at the end. I know that you will have elections not only for the Parliament, but also for the High Judiciary Council this month to apply the normal way to organize the Judiciary Council. And of course, it's needed in Italy to continue to implement reforms about not only the justice field, but I mean about also the fight against corruption and the lobbying in the with the different authorities, and we try to continue to move on this. But just to conclude, I want to say that it's important also in the justice field not only to work on the rule of law in general, but to apply, as I said, the Green Deal, one of the most important priorities for the Commission and for the European Union, and I mean with the due diligence process we try to do that, but also to go to the digital transition, and I've listened to different ministers from Italy too today about the digital transition, of course, also in the public sector, and certainly in the justice system. If we don't invest in recruitment, human resources, of course, but also in digital tools, it's impossible to reach the goal, to have a success. And again, I was pleased to see that in the Italian Recovery and Resilience Plan, it was possible to put a lot of money in the digitalization of the justice system, because we have started, in many countries, with the digitalization of the finance department. It's logical. It was to collect taxes. And you see that it's possible to work with your tax administration in many countries in Europe with digital tools. In justice, it's more complicated to have a real digital relation, but it's needed. And it's not only for the individual rights. I want to conclude with that, because you know that you have the right, following the treaty and following the Charter of Fundamental Rights, to have an access to an independent judge. And if I may, I add a qualified one and an efficient one, so not to wait too long before to receive a good decision. But it's not only for the individuals, it's also for the confidence and the trust between the member states and for the investors. Just to give an example, if a Dutch investor wants to invest in Italy or in Poland or in Hungary, maybe some are with a real trust in Mr. Orban, but I prefer to have a real trust in the justice system. If you invest in another member state, to have a good functioning of the internal market, to have a good functioning of all the possible exchanges, you need to have an access to an independent, qualified and efficient justice system. And it's what we are trying to do with our actions in the justice field. I know that it's quite different than many discussions that you have normally in this forum, but I'm sure that it's very important. It's one of the specificities of the European Union, that we have such a capacity to protect individual rights, rights of the companies, but also the relations between the authorities, thanks to such a kind of independent justice system. And I'm hoping, after the next elections here, but maybe also in other member states, that we'll continue to organize the process of reforms, like we have engaged a reform here in Italy, but also in other member states. And we have now efficient tools to do that, so I'm sure that we'll succeed.